My wife asked if her boss could be her date to the company's couples dance, and my cruel response was simply to get up from the table and say, "Then go with him, and don't come back." I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just made it clear that, for me, it was over. She laughed. She thought it was an exaggeration. She gave that brief laugh of someone who didn't understand the gravity of their own choice, as if it were just a casual conversation between a couple. But there, in the silence with which I stood up, she didn't realize that everything had already been broken for a long time. I just hadn't understood it yet. In the following days, what was just intuition turned into confirmation, and what had hurt before as doubt now bled as certainty. The betrayal wasn't new. It wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a moment. It was an entire chapter of our story written behind my back. I don't know what's worse, being betrayed or being made a fool of for so long. And what consumed me most wasn't the image of the two of them together, but the fact that probably she looked me in the eyes and said, "I love you," with her lips still stained from his touch. As if everything were normal, as if I were second priority in my own home. And the most absurd thing is that I didn't make a scene. I didn't chase after her. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I just withdrew. And it's in that silent exit that the loudest scream resides, because the silence of a betrayed man isn't peace. It's contained destruction. It's a heart bursting inside without letting it out. Time passed, and it passed cruelly within me, as if each second showed me a detail I hadn't noticed before. The phone always face down, the messages deleted too quickly, the "I'll work late" repeated every week, the long showers with the phone in the bathroom, the distance between our conversations, the absence of eye contact, the automatic ringtone, the distracted kiss. I remembered everything now, each scene reconnecting like pieces of a puzzle I refused to assemble while there was still time. But when I finally did, the picture was clear. I was the man she grew tired of loving. It hurt. It hurt more than I imagined it could. Because the love I gave was whole. I gave myself completely, even on the days I received nothing in return. I was the kind of man who noticed when she changed her shampoo, who knew the day of her cycle when she was most sensitive, who made coffee the way she liked it without her asking. I knew about the silences, the pains she didn't speak of, and even so, she left me long before she left home. She gave herself to another while I slept next to a body that no longer belonged to me. When the ball came around, she didn't even try to hide it. She asked if she could go with her boss as if she were asking me to buy bread at the bakery. There was a cruel nonchalance in the request, as if it weren't an invitation to the abyss, but just a social thing. I remember her expression when I answered, a mixture of confusion, disdain, and laughter, as if I were the dramatic one this time. And there was the summary of everything. I was always the exaggerator, the one who felt too much, the one who loved too much, the one who gave too much. She wasn't. She loved what life offered, not who was by her side. But fate is curious, and life relentless. Because after the ball, after the enchantment, after the fantasy of a night beside the man for whom she traded a home, came the emptiness, came the discard, came the loneliness that doesn't sleep in another room, but inside her heart. He didn't want her anymore, and she, finally, understood the value of what she left behind. But no apology can rebuild what was abandoned in silence. Time passed, and it passed through me like a cure. I found someone who doesn't need justifications to respect me, who doesn't mince words when it comes to valuing me, someone who looks at me with truth, not calculation. And then, unintentionally, I ran into my ex. In the same cafe where we used to share dreams. Now she was there, alone, facing the reflection of what she lost. Our eyes met. She smiled slightly, as if expecting some kind of return. But what she saw in me wasn't resentment, nor bitterness, nor longing. It was peace, a peace she never managed to give me. And there she realized that the story had ended, that her time was up, that what had been her place now belonged to someone else, and no matter how hard she tried, there was no longer room for her. not in me, nor in what I had built afterward. But the most ironic thing of all, the cruelest and most poetic thing, is that she only understood what she had lost. When she saw me smiling with someone else, in the same way I once smiled with her, she lost me. But not because of the betrayal itself. She lost me the instant she treated my love as something replaceable, the moment she thought she could play with what was real. And now all that remains for her is not remorse, but memory. And memories are worse than guilt. Because guilt still makes you want to make amends. Memory only hurts. I moved on. She tried to come back, but the forgiveness I gave was my final goodbye. Life has its ironies. Sometimes the greatest punishment isn't what you suffer, but what you let slip away. And what she let slip away was the love of her life. And the most amazing thing is that even after everything, even after the pain, the betrayal, the days I cried secretly in the shower so she wouldn't see, even after the long silences that cut through the room like a knife in the dark, even after the messages I never sent and the phone calls I ended before hearing her voice, I forgave her. Yes, I forgave. Because holding on to hatred is keeping alive the person who killed you inside, and I didn't want that anymore. Forgiveness was my freedom. But there's something she doesn't know, something she'll discover when she least expects it, because the real end of this story hasn't arrived yet. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize and have never supported any type of betrayal. All stories are fiction, but based on realities that many experience in silence. The goal is clear: to show how betrayal destroys homes, erodes trust, and leaves a lasting scar on those who truly love. Get ready. What you're about to hear is a story. Shocking, intense, and unforgettable. Fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the story. They met on an ordinary late afternoon in a neighborhood coffee shop where no one expects life to take a different turn. He wore a wrinkled blazer, carrying the weight of a routine only relieved by the strong, silent coffees he drank alone. She entered hurriedly, her hair awkwardly tied back, as if she had already faced a full day of meetings and phone calls. A silly bump, an exchange of apologies, a brief laugh, and somehow the conversation began there. It wasn't overwhelming, there were no fireworks, but there was something rarer: immediate comfort. His name was Daniel, hers Olivia, and for reasons neither of them could clearly explain, that conversation lasted almost 2 hours. Enough time for him to be late for his next meeting and for her to forget she had to go to the market. It was in this temporary lapse of attention that a story began to unfold. Daniel was a focused, methodical, and discreet man. He was 36 years old and worked as a data analyst at a medium-sized company, where he was respected for his seriousness and ability to solve problems without raising his voice. He had lived alone since leaving his parents' house a few years after college. He had few friends, but solid friendships, and a younger sister with whom he spoke religiously every week. He was a man of routines, but that didn't make him predictable. On the contrary, his actions surprised precisely because they were done intentionally, never out of obligation. When someone won Daniel's heart, they also won his unconditional loyalty. Olivia was 33 years old and had a presence that filled any room, even when she wasn't saying a word. She was a marketing coordinator at a multinational company, and her daily routine consisted of presentations, goals, demands, and improvised solutions. She was known for her firm stance, but also for her charisma. People enjoyed being around her. But what few knew was that behind that determined woman was a girl who, in silence, still sought refuge in someone who would offer her peace, not pressure. Olivia had been hurt in previous relationships, and when she met Daniel, what was just a coffee became a breath of fresh air. She hadn't expected that such a quiet man could give her so much space to be herself without judgment. Their relationship developed naturally, without any games. They started seeing each other frequently, first on weekends, then during the week. Olivia loved how Daniel observed everything before speaking, how his opinions always came after understanding the whole context. Daniel, on the other hand, admired how she laughed at her own jokes, how she was able to lighten any dense conversation. They balanced each other out. While one was a pause, the other was an impulse. And it was precisely this balance that led them to live together in just over a year. The house was small but full of details. There were post-it notes with reminders stuck to the bathroom mirror, coffee cups forgotten in the cupboard, and a playlist of old songs they listened to on Saturday mornings while sharing coffee in silence. Their routine formed amidst laughter, long conversations in bed, discussions about dividing household chores, and travel plans that sometimes materialized, sometimes didn't. But the essentials were always there: respect, dialogue, and presence. Daniel wasn't a man of grand gestures, but his way of loving was constant. He paid attention to details: the way she moved her hair when she was nervous, the types of wine she avoided, the series she watched in secret and pretended not to care about when he found out. Olivia, in turn, found in him a kind of safe haven, someone who didn't compete with her pace, but also didn't leave her alone when her world fell apart. For the first 3 years, the relationship seemed solid. They created their own traditions, like having sushi for dinner on Fridays, watching reruns of old series in the early hours of Sunday mornings, or simply walking to the furthest bakery just because she liked the smell of freshly baked bread. There was a silent complicity between them, the certainty that they could be who they were without needing to prove anything. Friends commented on how the two seemed to have been made for each other, and in many moments they themselves believed it. But like anything that goes on too long without maintenance, some noises began to emerge. Small, almost imperceptible at first. Olivia started bringing work home more often, and Daniel, who had always respected her space, began to miss things that had once been natural: a longer touch, a more present gaze, a sincere question at the end of the day. She was always tired, and justified everything with the weight of her position, the deadlines, the goals. Daniel believed her because he trusted her, but something inside him was starting to tighten. There were no clear signs, just an uncomfortable feeling of distance. They still had dinner together, but the conversations were about external things: her work, the news, the plans of some acquaintance. When he tried to bring up something more personal, she smiled, changed the subject, or responded with rehearsed phrases. Daniel, not wanting to pressure her, backed away. But each retreat was another inch more between them. He wasn't sure when he started to feel alone, even when he was with someone. Maybe it was the night she arrived late and didn't explain why, or the weekend she canceled plans claiming tiredness, but then posted a photo at a cafe with friends. Maybe it was when she started sleeping on her side, or when she stopped asking him to wait for her to watch the next episode of the series they watched together. He didn't say anything. He continued making coffee, asking if she needed help with reports, noting important dates in his diary so he wouldn't forget to buy something she liked. But deep down, a void was growing. There were no accusations, no arguments. Just a strange silence, made of emotional absence. Olivia, for her part, seemed increasingly energized. Her career was on the rise, and she spoke proudly of new projects, the contacts she was making, the invitations she received to events. Daniel listened to everything with genuine admiration, but each of her victories seemed to place them in different universes. It was as if, suddenly, he no longer knew where he fit into her life. The break didn't come with shouts or tears. It happened one ordinary night at a typical dinner, when Olivia, her voice lighter than expected for such a weighty question, asked if he would mind if she went to the company's couples dance accompanied by her boss. There was a rehearsed naturalness to the question, as if she knew exactly what to say to appear innocent. Daniel was silent for a few seconds. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. She maintained her calm expression, as if it were merely a formality. He looked at her with a blank expression, as if he understood everything before hearing any explanation. And then, he rose from the table and answered with a firmness he didn't even know he possessed. From that moment on, something was over. But there was no talk of betrayal yet. It was only the beginning of what would become an open wound. On the outside, everything seemed normal. They continued living under the same roof for a few more weeks, sharing spaces like two polite strangers. Olivia didn't seem to realize the depth of what she had caused. Or perhaps she did, but preferred to pretend she didn't. Daniel, for his part, maintained the same routine, the same gestures. But his gaze was already distant. He observed everything with a calmness that was unsettling. There were no more demands, no more questions. He simply observed. And it was in this silence that the truth, little by little, began to take shape. Because sometimes, the worst betrayal isn't the one that happens all at once. It's the one that builds up gradually, while one loves for two and the other pretends not to notice. But what Olivia didn't yet know was that everything she believed to be under control was about to fall apart. And when the castle of appearances crumbled, she would understand, too late, that love is not infinite, and that the man she thought would always be there one day simply wouldn't be anymore. On the night of the ball, the house was enveloped in a different kind of silence. Daniel was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped on his knees, watching the light from the hallway filtering through the half-open door. Outside, Olivia was finishing getting ready, pacing back and forth in her heels on the cold floor, her perfume wafting through the house like a memory that didn't yet smell of goodbye, but no longer smelled of home. He said nothing. He just listened. Every step she took, every sound of her zipper closing, every light tap of the brush on her hair. Their life was still there, in small sounds, but already completely out of reach. When she walked through the bedroom door, she was beautiful. And he knew that this wasn't just a night out. It was the final scene of a play he was no longer a part of. She hesitated for a second as she looked at him. He looked up slowly, without anger, without despair. Just with the calm of someone who had already said goodbye inwardly. She smiled, trying to sound lighthearted, said she'd be back early, that it wasn't a big deal, that it was just one night. He didn't answer, and that bothered her more than if he had yelled. That night, he didn't wait. He didn't stay trapped within the walls that no longer meant home. He went to a small bar with soft music where nobody knew him and nobody would ask questions. He ordered a whiskey, then another, not to drown his sorrows, but to let time pass without it hurting. Deep down, he already knew that story was over. It wasn't the dance, it wasn't the boss, it wasn't the night. It was everything, the accumulation of absences. When he returned home, she had already arrived. She was on the sofa, still in her heels, her dress slightly wrinkled. Her face carried a mixture of guilt and an attempt at normalcy. She said the dance was pleasant, that she danced, that she talked, that everyone asked about him. Daniel nodded, placed the key on the kitchen counter, and went to take a shower. There was no goodnight kiss, no touch, no argument, just silence. And the silence at that stage said everything. In the following days, Olivia tried to act somewhat normally, but something about the way he looked at her bothered her. It wasn't hatred, it was the absence of emotion, as if she no longer made a difference. He didn't seek her out to talk, didn't show jealousy, didn't make assumptions. This, for her, was more unsettling than if he had directly accused her. One night after dinner, she tried to talk. She said he was distant, that he seemed cold. He just stared at her for a few seconds and replied with a cutting coldness, "You made a choice, and I made another. We're not in the same place anymore." She tried to argue back, but there were no points. He wasn't accusing her. He was just stating a fact. It was then that, on a random Saturday, she went out to buy flowers. An old habit, part of the couple's routine, but one she had abandoned long ago. She wanted to revive that gesture, perhaps in an attempt to rekindle something. Upon entering the cafe next to the flower shop, she came face to face with Daniel. He was sitting near the window, smiling. The woman in front of him was young, delicately beautiful, with attentive eyes. They were laughing, and the glances between them carried something Olivia hadn't seen in a long time. Lightness. The world stopped for a few seconds. She stood motionless in the doorway, staring at that scene that seemed familiar, but where she was no longer the protagonist. Daniel didn't see her, or he saw her, but didn't react. He remained there, in that world that was no longer hers. She stepped back, almost stumbling on the sidewalk. The bouquet pressed against her chest, as if trying to stop her heart from falling. She spent the rest of the day locked in her room, trying to ignore the image that had become imprinted on her memory. But the waiter's words, unintentionally, echoed in her head. He always orders the same thing, ever since he started coming with her. In other words, it wasn't the first time. It wasn't a coincidence. It was routine. It was intimacy. It was exactly what she had let slip away. That night, when Daniel arrived, she was seated at the table. He entered calmly as usual. She awaited him with the bouquet in the center of the table. He approached, looked at the flowers, then at her. She tried to smile. She asked if he wanted to talk, and he, in the same serene tone, replied, "Talk about what, Olivia? About everything you've realized now, after losing it." She tried to argue, said she didn't want to lose him, that she still loved him. He shook his head slowly. "You didn't lose me today. You lost me when you decided to live alone, even while living with me. You lost me when you stopped seeing me. You lost me when you thought I didn't deserve sincerity." She stood up, approached him, touched his arm. "I made a mistake, but I'm here. I'm trying to fix it." He stepped back gently. "You can't fix something that's been broken so many times. I have nowhere left to store this pain, Olivia. I've just learned to live without it." In the following days she tried. She sent messages, prepared his favorite dish, left notes, but he was beyond reply. Until one gray afternoon, she entered that coffee shop again. Daniel was there, but he wasn't alone. The woman from the other day was sitting across from him, and this time he was holding her hand. When Olivia approached, he saw her. He didn't stand up. He didn't let go of her hand. He simply stared at her with the serenity of someone who no longer owed her anything. She swallowed hard, murmured a hi, and heard a polite hello from him. The new woman looked at her with a restrained, almost respectful smile. And it was in that moment, in that second frozen in time, that Olivia realized. She realized that Daniel had moved on, that his life was no longer a possibility for her, that the man she had stopped loving out of distraction was now loved by another woman with presence. That night, she went home alone. She sat on the bed. She picked up her cell phone. She opened her gallery of old photos. The trips, the smiles, the birthdays, everything so vivid, so full of life. And now, so distant. The bouquet on the table was already wilting. The notes remained where she had left them. The words she thought of saying no longer mattered, because the forgiveness Daniel gave her was, in truth, a goodbye, a final point without bitterness, but definitive, and so, without scandal, without dramatic scenes, without soap opera speeches, she understood what it meant to lose the love of her life. Not because of someone else, but because she hadn't recognized the value of what she had when there was still time. The seasons had changed. What was once heat was now a biting wind, and the streets, draped in dry leaves, seemed to whisper memories that even time couldn't completely erase. The house where so many mornings were shared now belonged to silence. She kept the property. He left with his head held high, without fighting for furniture, memories, or any rights. He took only a few boxes, 2 suitcases, and a piece that no one could ever give him while he was still there. Daniel left as he lived that ending, with dignity. He found another place, another corner to breathe, another space where his love wouldn't be a burden to be tested, but a welcome presence. The change was discreet, almost invisible to others, but brutal for those who remained. Olivia, for her part, remained in the same routine, in the same space, now too vast for so much emptiness. The bed seemed larger, the silence denser, and the corners of the house began to scream small absences she had previously ignored. His plate that was left behind, the shirt she didn't want to take, the scent that wouldn't return. The days went by without her noticing the gravity of the loneliness she had dug with her own hands. She tried to distract herself with work, with colleagues, with projects that still demanded her mind. But when the workday ended and she returned home, his absence was almost physical. It wasn't just longing. It was guilt, the worst kind of longing. Meanwhile, Daniel was blossoming. His relationship with his new wife grew stronger with time, not through speed, but through the tranquility with which they respected each other. It was different. There were no games, no demands disguised as attention. There was lightness, the kind of lightness he hadn't felt in years. With her, Sundays regained the taste of shared coffee. Conversations went on late without the clock seeming to tick. The laughter was spontaneous. And more than that, he felt seen. Not as emotional support, not as a marital obligation, but as someone who was enough precisely because of who he was. Olivia tried writing letters, rehearsed messages, recorded voice messages she never sent. One night she went out with a former college classmate trying to force a fresh start, but returned home feeling emptier than before. There was no connection, nothing there that could fill the void she had once thrown away. Once she met with a mutual friend and, between glasses of wine and drunken confessions, confessed what she had never said aloud, that she had let herself be carried away by a stupid vanity, by a desire to feel desired at a time when everything seemed stagnant, that she hadn't appreciated the silent man who had always been there. Her friend, unintentionally, was cruelly honest. "You lost him, Liv. He's happy now. You can see it in his eyes." Time was merciless to her. The memories, which had once come in soft flashes, now returned forcefully, in detail. The way he poured coffee into her favorite mug without her asking, the way he stroked her back while they slept, the little notes left in the books she read. Small things she only noticed when they were gone. She tried to seek help, went to therapy, started walking alone in the mornings. It was a real effort, but still, it always seemed like she was chasing something that would never be within reach again. A year later, Olivia received a wedding invitation from a mutual friend who was also Daniel's. She considered not going, wanting to avoid that pain, but she went. She needed to see with her own eyes what everyone already knew. He had rebuilt his life. And there he was, hand in hand with his new partner, with a sparkle in his eyes that she herself hadn't seen in a long time. He saw her, waved discreetly, without hostility, only with respect. During the party, they crossed paths briefly. She said, "You look good," and he replied, "I am." And that was all. There was no deep conversation, no questions about the past. But in that brief moment, she understood that there was no longer any space within her capable of accommodating his return. Their story was a demolished house. That same night, Olivia returned home and faced the mirror. For the first time, she saw herself without excuses, without defensive walls, without justifications. It was her, and only her. And there, in the reflection, she understood something that hurt more than all the losses combined. She hadn't been replaced. She had allowed herself to fade away. Out of vanity, out of neediness, out of not knowing how to recognize a love that didn't shout, but sustained. A silent love made of gestures, not promises. And now, all that remained was memory. Daniel, on the other hand, moved on without hatred, without a desire for revenge, without carrying the past like a cross. He didn't want to erase what he had experienced with Olivia, but he kept everything as part of a journey. He knew he had given his best, and that, in itself, was enough for him to live in peace. What had destroyed him before had now set him free. The betrayal was not the end. It was a new beginning, a painful, necessary, liberating new beginning. Each followed a path the other could no longer travel. She, with longing for what was. He, with gratitude for what was to come. And life, in its relentless way of teaching, showed them all that no love survives without reciprocity, that no bond withstands neglect, that true love needs to be nurtured while it exists, not after it's gone. And you, what did you think of this story? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to know if this story touched you, if you've ever experienced something similar, or if it made you reflect on your own choices. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this. We have many other stories, both real and fictional, but always with messages that speak directly to the heart. And remember, betrayal is never a mistake. It's a choice. And choices have consequences. They don't just hurt the other person. They hurt ourselves, who we are, what we've built. This channel, it does not support, justify, or romanticize any type of betrayal. Here we tell stories to show that true love requires respect, presence, and courage. Until the next story.